the hell that was.
You're absolutely right, okay, in your analysis. And let me just say, you know that I like you when I'm willing to sit through a podcast episode featuring Gavin Newsom just to prepare for this. Okay,
God bless.
I can't stand him. I can't stand his raspy voice. And it's not for any superficial reason other than the fact that I live in California. I've had the displeasure.
I saw. Yeah. What it looked to me like he was negotiating with a deaf prostitute.
Most people believe they have Gavin Newsom completely figured out. He is known for the perfectly styled hair, the polished delivery, and a campaign-ready grin that never seems to fade. However, when Ana Kasparian and Tyrus take a closer look, that glossy exterior starts to crack like old paint. What initially appears to be a standard political debate shifts into something far more awkward and revealing, yet surprisingly more entertaining than expected. By the end, viewers are left questioning if this exposure of Gavin Newsom was an accident or if the uncomfortable truth was finally spoken plainly.
The talent in the Democratic Party right now, people are going to get mad at me for saying this, but I genuinely feel there isn't much. Like I don't know who the next leader of this party is going to be. Everyone is kind of singing the praises of Gavin Newsom. I live in California. He's the governor here. He's a disaster of epic proportions.
If you find this analysis valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel. It truly supports our work. Somewhere between the carefully managed confidence of Gavin Newsom and the luster of his high-end political branding, Ana Kasparian and Tyrus stepped in. They acted like observers who had absolutely no interest in pretending that the elite image of Gavin Newsom was grounded in anything more than careful staging.
Watch the tape. Yes! He literally goes, I want some of this, then you do some of this, and I'll do some of that back to you, and then we'll do this, and then I'll pay you, and then we'll do it again.
True.
And then she kept saying, no. Okay, how about this? You do this one first, then we do this one, then we give a little back and forth.
The energy of the discussion shifted almost immediately. This wasn't because Ana Kasparian sought out theatrical conflict, but because reality has a way of showing up and refusing to be ignored. What followed was a methodical deconstruction of the narrative surrounding Gavin Newsom, a story that many felt had been operating on cruise control for far too long.
Again, has cost the state more than $3.75 billion. So that's the exact figure. And in the 5 years that this program has been in place, homelessness has only gotten worse, which is a pretty clear sign that it's not working. So it's been in place since 2020. Homelessness in California has skyrocketed in the 5 years Home Key has been in place, growing by more than 20%, according to the Public Policy Institute of California. That's an increase of some 36,000 people between 2019 and 2024.
Ana Kasparian approached the subject of Gavin Newsom with a precise skepticism that sounds professional until you realize it is slicing right through the political marketing. She didn't need to rely on hyperbole because the contradictions in the leadership of Gavin Newsom began to emerge naturally, one after another under her scrutiny.
2014, voters in California overwhelmingly supported a ballot measure to support building more reservoirs in the state in order to bulk up our water infrastructure because we live in a drought-prone state. That passed in 2014. Funding was attached to it. You want to know how many reservoirs have been built since 2014? Zero. This state is an utter joke because of the people.
Meanwhile, Tyrus entered with the perspective of someone who has witnessed the same political performance too many times to keep applauding. Together, Ana Kasparian and Tyrus created a rhythm that turned the segment into a political audit rather than a typical argument. The humor arose organically as the reputation of Gavin Newsom for relentless optimism collided with real-world outcomes that didn't fit the PR plan. Ana Kasparian highlighted how his sophisticated rhetoric often fails to connect with the actual lives of the people he represents, while Tyrus focused on the irony of a leader whose words sound great until you check the data on the ground. The humor wasn't mean-spirited. It came from the absurdity of watching the divide between the words of Gavin Newsom and his actual results grow wider.
Isn't it? I'm sorry, I'm confused. He's still governor, right?
Yes.
So he could do something about it. That's the most irritating thing is that why did anyone say with a follow-up where he's like, the homeless situation is ridiculous? Follow-up question, aren't you governor?
Yeah.
Like, that's the difference. That's the difference between the radical left and President Trump. He'll talk about something as it's being taken care of. He's going to go up and say, listen, I'm going to sign an executive order to stop homelessness, and here's how we're going to do it.
As the dialogue progressed, the public persona of Gavin Newsom began to resemble a luxury brochure left out in a storm. Still vibrant, but clearly damaged by the elements. The points made by Ana Kasparian were effective because she identified his inconsistencies as a consistent pattern rather than isolated incidents. Tyrus reinforced this, signaling that his patience for the usual excuses had reached its limit. The sarcasm sharpened as they treated the contradictions of Gavin Newsom as predictable traits rather than new discoveries. It was fascinating to watch Ana Kasparian and Tyrus dismantle the leadership style of Gavin Newsom without resorting to manufactured rage. They focused on how branding is often used to avoid accountability, especially when appearances are prioritized over tangible progress. The confidence of Gavin Newsom slowly became the punchline as the duo showed how polished messaging often ignores deep-seated problems. When they turned to actual policy, the irony was thick, as nothing exposes a narrative faster than a leader celebrating success while moving the goalposts.
Gavin Newsom's leadership in California has been a complete and utter disaster. As a Californian, I 100% have experienced he's out to lunch, right? Like, he changes his ideology depending on what he thinks is fresh and what's hip at any given moment. 76% of Californians voted in favor of something known as Prop 36, which is to roll back some of the soft on crime policies. That requires funding. He has been pushing back against adequately funding the efforts to essentially...
The narrative of Gavin Newsom works well in theory, but as Tyrus noted, real life is rarely that cooperative, and the humor hit home because it reflected the daily experiences of many citizens. It felt as though the conversation was finally addressing the frustrations that have been mounting in the background. The leadership style of Gavin Newsom served as a case study in optics over execution. Ana Kasparian was quick to mention that looking like a capable leader isn't the same as being one. Tyrus framed the entire approach as a long-running performance that expects praise by default. The sarcasm flowed as they showed how the success of Gavin Newsom is often measured by media hits rather than statistical improvements. Crucially, they didn't paint Gavin Newsom as a caricature. Ana Kasparian spoke with a sense of weary disappointment, suggesting the issues weren't shocking, just exhausting. This mix of clarity and frustration created powerful commentary, especially when the optimistic tone of Gavin Newsom clashed with the harsh economic realities presented by the duo. Ana Kasparian viewed this disconnect as a sign of a leader who values his inner circle's advice over objective results.
One of the left's money schemes where the guy who's in charge is saying, we need help, we need to figure out a way to do this. So they're going to make a committee. They already have bubonic plague in California. I remember Dr. Drew was going, there's bubonic plague back in California. Wow. I grew up in California. I will not bring my kids back to my neighborhood because I don't feel like walking through, as you affectionately call, hobos, drug addicts and pedophiles and criminals who hide there because it's a great place to hide and commit crimes. So he could do something. He doesn't want to do something. He's just saying to see if the American people are stupid enough to fall.
Ana Kasparian observed that outward confidence doesn't solve structural crises or pay the bills. The humor here felt real because it was based on common recognition. The tone changed when the focus shifted to accountability, which often makes even the smoothest politicians look uncomfortable. Ana Kasparian pointed out how the wins of Gavin Newsom are shouted from the rooftops while his failures are buried under jargon. Tyrus argued that a leader loses all standing when taking responsibility becomes a choice rather than a duty. As this pattern became undeniable, the humor grew even sharper. They viewed the massive political ambitions of Gavin Newsom with a blend of doubt and irony, seeing them as impressive but increasingly detached from the reality of governing. Ana Kasparian noticed how a focus on future goals can distract from current failures, while Tyrus mocked the habit of chasing the next big thing before fixing the current mess. The critique from Ana Kasparian and Tyrus felt like a much-needed reality check, as the persona of Gavin Newsom buckled under the weight of facts that refused to remain abstract.
An addict in a room alone where no one can administer Narcan. So these flaws existed within the Project Home Key program from the very beginning. And no one has really cared about fixing it, right? Because you can have a really good idea, but you're going to run into issues and you have to recalibrate. The problem was, according to audits that were done on this program, there was no effort to recalibrate. In fact, there's been no tracking of whether or not these programs work to begin with.
Turning to public perception, Ana Kasparian remarked that the image management of Gavin Newsom often seems more sophisticated than the results he actually delivers. Tyrus suggested that such extreme polish often masks insecurity, particularly when reality keeps puncturing the story. The jokes were effective because they highlighted how repetition can make even obvious contradictions feel normal if they aren't challenged. It was clear that Ana Kasparian and Tyrus weren't just trying to win a debate. They were trying to recalibrate expectations. They didn't frame the leadership of Gavin Newsom as a unique failure, but as a symptom of a political culture where presentation outruns performance. The humor invited the audience to look for these patterns themselves. As the exchange continued, the confidence of Gavin Newsom began to look less like a strength and more like a protective shield. Ana Kasparian and Tyrus methodically pulled that shield away, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. By this point, the laughter felt inevitable because once you see the pattern in the narrative of Gavin Newsom, it becomes impossible to ignore.
Me, when I signed on to criminal justice reform, what I thought I was signing on to was we're going to reform our prisons. But the idea of, oh, we're just not going to punish anyone for pretty much anything is not what I thought I was signing up for. But that's pretty much what we've gotten. And preemptively shutting down, 4 to 5 state prisons without really having a plan in place for what happens to oftentimes violent inmates was a disastrous idea by Gavin Newsom, to be honest.
As the discussion wound down, there was no flashy conclusion, just the quiet impact of seeing a polished story face serious scrutiny. Gavin Newsom remained the same person, but the audience's perception had clearly changed. Tyrus left the viewers with a thought more damaging than any insult: the idea that confidence without substance eventually becomes a comedy. Ana Kasparian and Tyrus didn't treat Gavin Newsom as a mystery, but as a textbook example of how political theater can continue even when the foundation is shaky. The humor worked because they framed his contradictions as built-in features, not bugs. Ana Kasparian guided viewers through these inconsistencies with a steady hand, while Tyrus provided the commentary of someone whose patience had finally run out. The sweeping, aspirational language used by Gavin Newsom became more ironic when Ana Kasparian compared it to actual timelines that are never met. She noted that his messaging seems designed for a cheering crowd, a plan that fails the moment someone stops clapping. Tyrus agreed, calling the search for easy applause a dangerous metric for success.
The Democratic Party's not going anywhere because we only have 2 options.
Yeah.
So even doesn't matter. We've been around forever. Yeah, because both parties do a good job of keeping a third party out.
Right.
So you won't see any. So what they do is every once in a while they change their face. So Democratic Party was overtaken by activists and wannabe terrorists. Because it's funny because and this is the difference between the 2 parties. When Republicans are losing and being attacked, i.e. when Facebook was taking everything you say, your rights away, if you said the wrong.
The resulting laughter wasn't about petty mockery. It was about the recognition of a familiar political trope. The conversation revealed how the confidence of Gavin Newsom seems to increase as the topics become more abstract, shining brightest when he can speak in concepts rather than specifics. Ana Kasparian noted that abstraction is a great way to hide inconvenient details, while Tyrus reminded everyone that a leader's credibility is built in those very details. The truth is that clarity is only a threat to stories that aren't true. Ana Kasparian and Tyrus presented the leadership of Gavin Newsom as a lesson in how to maintain momentum through branding rather than problem-solving. The sarcasm felt natural as they pointed out how the same talking points are recycled and polished to look new. The audience could feel that sense of déjà vu, making the jokes land with more force. Ultimately, the segment suggested that the persona of Gavin Newsom is built to project a sense of inevitability, as if his confidence alone could substitute for actual results.
Will not vote for a candidate that takes $1 from AIPAC.
It's interesting. It's interesting. I haven't thought about AIPAC. And it's interesting. You're like the first to bring up AIPAC in years.
Is it interesting? Okay, that was California Governor Gavin Newsom malfunctioning as he was being asked a question that he didn't expect and didn't really seem prepared to answer. Now, Newsom malfunctioned and said the word interesting a total of 8 times after he was confronted on the topic of AIPAC.
Finally, Ana Kasparian challenged that air of inevitability, noting that confidence is only certain until it faces a real test. Tyrus supported this, pointing out that reality is the most difficult opponent any politician has to face. The humor sharpened as the supposed certainty of Gavin Newsom faded under intense questioning. By looking past the surface, Ana Kasparian and Tyrus proved their critique wasn't just for show. It was born from a genuine frustration with leaders who demand patience while delivering very little. The jokes allowed the audience to process this disappointment without becoming entirely cynical. By the end, the image of Gavin Newsom felt less like a towering figure and more like a human being under examination. Ana Kasparian and Tyrus demonstrated that you don't have to be hostile to be effective, and that humor is often the best tool for uncovering the truth. The final takeaway was simple. While confidence can sell a narrative, only consistency makes it worth believing.